Hey, good evening, SKFLers. This is Rob Morrow here with the Rockford Report. Today I have six-time SKFL champion Casey Taggart with me. Good evening, Casey.
How's it going, Rob? Me, I've been excited to kind of pop the cherry and get my first experience. Been impressed with it. So thanks for the lead in. I've been chasing number 7 here for a few years. So we'll see if I can get back into things this year.
We have a few technical issues, so we should be done with this by now. But we'll just say Rockford had a bit of a fumble in terms of the audio situation. So before we get into the rankings,
safe.
Casey,
I won't tell everybody.
before I get into the rankings, Casey, just a quick question. You say you're hunting number 7. What do you think the IAC franchise, what's your next few steps you think you can do to get to number 7?
I mean, it's early. I mean, 0-3 is definitely not ideal. I really liked my team kind of coming out of the draft. I've heard you mention this in previous pods, but it's all about kind of those studs. It's always about, I always say you need 4 guys on your team that can get you 50. I had that for years when it was Breeze and Vic and Dez and Jamal. Then if you look at the other teams that have won since, Ian's had studs, Yusuf's had studs. A lot of teams chase depth, but if you don't have those guys that can go out there and throw up the big numbers, that's where I fell off. I think you guys talked about it earlier where, I went for value and I kept guys like Jeremy Hill and CJ Anderson. And when those guys don't hit, you don't have the star power to go out there and compete with the contenders. And so I think that's what I was looking for this year. I knew winning the Toilet Bowl last year got me that one pick. I let some guys like Hopkins go just because I wanted to secure that first pick. And then moving up to get Kyler, I kind of just, gave me what I wanted. I had the stud back. I got the stud quarterback that I felt like you needed to be able to compete with Ian. Great. So, no, I felt good. And, the first 3 games in the Carl are always going to be tough. But, if you look at the history, 0-3 teams have made it. I got the numbers here. We've had 22 times where an 0-3 team has happened after the first 3 weeks, and 5 times that team has made the playoffs. So you're talking 23%. You kind of just need to get hot. So it's week by week now. I've got to find a way to win 1 or 2 more games and get close to 500 and then just finish strong. So we'll see what happens. But, a couple tough breaks. I mean, honestly, you look at my 3 games, and all 3 of those could have been wins. So I feel pretty confident with what he's doing. I just got to get the right starting lineup figured out and hit on some of those receivers.
Yeah, and the power rankings like you. I mean, they have you at 5th in the power rankings, which I actually kind of like our power rankings, frankly. I think they do a pretty accurate job of putting stuff together. Your all play record's good. All signs point that you're not going to go in 14, that's for sure. So we'll see how it goes. But let's jump into the rankings. We'll go with number 11. And since you're the guest, I'll kind of let you lead on all of these, and then I'll kind of follow up. But right now, we both have Dark Side as our number 11. Now, neither of us ranked our own teams. It's kind of a tradition here on the Rockford rankings. So Casey did not rank himself. I did not rank myself either. So that's why we have 11. So, Kenny's team has kind of gotten hit down like a mule a little bit. But tell me your thoughts on kind of why you put him at number 11.
Yeah, I mean, it's coming out of the draft. I knew he was going to be in trouble. And basically, you looked at his squad and you knew it was going to be, okay, if Barkley can be one of the top 2 players in the league, he might be able to ride that. Losing Barkley, I mean, just destroys anybody when you lose your top player for the season. We'll talk about Ian later, but if you lose a guy for 3 or 4 weeks, you can kind of manage and survive for the year. And it's just you're chasing 40 points, it feels like, every week. The Gronk pick has been talked about. That one hurt. The one thing about Kenny's team that I don't think has been mentioned yet was, he kept Drew Brees over Aaron Rodgers. And I know one was a 2, one was a 3. But if you're drafting Gronk at 2 anyways, he'd be there at 3. And I feel like right now,
at 7.
Aaron Rodgers than Brees. So he's in a weird spot because now he's been burnt 2 years in a row by Barkley. And so it's tough to go down a 3rd time with him. I think he's probably looking to make a trade. But when you're trading a guy like Barkley right now, who's not going to help you, you're limited to where you can deal him. We're talking about guys that are rebuilding. And I don't know if there's anybody else out there. And then with that being said, is Kenny rebuilding or is he trying to make a run right now by moving Barkley? So he's got an uphill battle. Like we said early, all he's got to do is find 6 wins and he'll be there at the end. So it can happen, but I just don't really like his roster. You know, he went very veteran based across the board when you think about it. Big Ben is kind of him right now. The Darrell Henderson pickup is huge and it's buying him some time. I don't know how that changes when Cam Akers gets healthy. I think
Right.
when Akers gets healthy, they're still going to filter him in. So he's been riding that for a little bit, but Akers is coming back right around the corner, and I think that just is another hit to, you know, Henderson, who's arguably his best non-quarterback right now. So I think he's in trouble, and I've gotten word on the street from some sources that some Barkley conversations are happening across the league. So I'm interested to see if he finally moves. I know, you know, he was drafted by Kinney, and he's been owned by Kinney for forever. So I know it's a tough piece to move on from, but like I said, yeah, you get burnt by him 2 years in a row, and I think you just kind of have to abandon ship and see what you can get for him.
Last in points, worst all-play record, but he does have that one win, so there is some hope. Let's look at number 10. A little bit of a difference of opinion here, I think. I've got Yusuf's team makes me unhappy so far in 2020, and then you've got Blake's team. Tell me why you went Blake there.
You know, it's tough to have Russell Wilson, who's the league high scorer right now, down at 10. But you know, you look at his team and it's just not that intimidating after Russell Wilson. You know, the SKFL, I think we've all learned now. We've had some new owners come in over the last 6 years. There's a learning curve there. You know, you can be really good at fantasy and understand that there's some different things about our league. And I mean, right now, right off the bat, the Matt Ryan trade hurts. I mean, obviously, you traded him and the guy gets injured. But you start looking at his team, and it's, you know, Melvin Gordon and Devin Singletary. Singletary's coming off a big game, but that's when Moss was inactive. I think Moss is going to come back and take those numbers down. Melvin Gordon and that Bronco off crap. So, you know, he's got Devontae Adams gives him that other stud piece that's hurt right now. But after that, it's guys like, you know, Golden Tate and Jarvis Landry and a couple of the slot guys for the Bucks. So he's lacking that third scorer right now. He's got 2 very good guys, but then he falls off, and his third and fourth guys are, you know, wouldn't be starting on some of the top ranked teams in the SKFL. So the Sutton injury hurt. I mean, Sutton was going to be big and was going to be his legit kind of number 2 receiver, and it's just hard to replace that. The one thing I'll say about Blake, I think he needs to be a little bit more active on you know, Tuesday waivers, free agencies. I think he's missed. I know he missed this week's, but he's kind of in a position where he needs to add a startable piece. One guy that he got that I was actually high on, but he hasn't done anything right now, is Evan Ingram. So I think when you had Evan Ingram, you thought you had a top 5 or 6 tight end, and you know, he's barely startable right now. So Wilson, I mean, is putting up unreal numbers. If he's throwing up 50s and 60s, he's going to have a shot depending on who is playing. But at some point, you know, Wilson down a 75 touchdown pace. So at some point, you feel like that number is going to come back down, and he's going to be more scoring in the 30s and 40s. And I just don't.
That's a good point. Russ is not going to play like this all year.
Exactly.
And when that dip happens, does he have somebody that can make up that difference?
Yeah, I mean, the Herbert pick was huge. I mean, when he made the pick, I didn't think Herbert would be starting until, you know, week 10, if at all. So I thought it was more just okay, he understands the keeper aspect. He's going to get a guy that he can go into next year with. But to get Herbert coming out in week 2 is huge, because moving on from Matt Ryan, you know, Derek Carr wasn't going to be your number 2 guy. He kind of needs to just be your bye week and good matchup play. So getting Herbert, I think, is going to help. I don't think the Chargers are going to go back to Tyrod anytime soon.
Now, so if you're Blake, you keep Herbert, or do you look to deal him to try to get competitive here in 2020?
I think you look at his next couple games. I mean, it's the same thing right now. Anybody with 1 win is definitely still in it. We have that early trade deadline. So I think if he loses his next 2, he's definitely looking to kind of build for next year, I feel like.
I agree.
But if you can find a way to win 1 or 2 and then get to, you know, 2 and 4 is always a spot where if you get hot late, the nice thing about, you know, in the SKFL and our schedule is you play your schedule late at the end of the year. So if you can peak and get hot, you know, come November, you can make up some ground in the division. You're not just chasing all these wild card teams, but as long as you stay in striking distance of the top spot in your division, you can get back in it if you kind of start peaking around week 10.
Okay, and I went with Yusuf's team here. I won't go into much detail because I want Casey kind of run the show here, but very similar in terms of overall numbers to Blake. I just kind of gave Blake a little bit more of a nod just because of the rest piece, but everything Casey said there, I do not disagree with any of that. So at number 9,
I'll talk about Happy when we get to him on mine.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think he was in the top 4. I mean, 4 spot with you guys last week, if I remember correctly.
He wasn't.
He wasn't? Okay.
Musa was.
Ian called him the team to beat, is what I do remember from last Friday.
Yeah, he called it. This is based on, this is like the AP rankings. It's like what's right now. I'm not predicting anything necessarily.
And I mean, just closure on my rankings, I'm the same way. Like, I mean, in the NFL, the Chicago Bears are 3-0. They're not a top 5 power ranked team right now. I'm not buying that 3-0 record. So mine is a lot less based on what they've done the last 3 weeks as opposed to what I think they're going to do the remainder of the year.
And with that in mind, we go to number 9, AJ's team, Swang Song Squad, Alliteration Deluxe. Got beat by Rockford last week. Never a good thing, especially when Rockford only puts up 207. He had a golden opportunity there to go to 2-1. AJ's team, you have him at 9. Not a playoff team in your eyes?
I don't think so. You know, he can get lucky with some of those receivers that he hits on. You know, Jefferson, but you look back at the SKFL and anybody that's starting, you know, 2 starting rookie receivers has never had success. I mean, they're just inconsistent. Right. If you think you're going to ride with Ayuk, Jefferson, and Henry Ruggs, 2 of those 3 consistently, you're in for a long year. Those guys are going to have games where they just don't show up. And his other 2 positions, he just doesn't have the studs. I wouldn't be surprised if Haskins it gets benched here in the next couple weeks. So him moving on from Brady, which, I mean, arguably, it was an end of the second round pick. So, you know, he by getting a tight end that he can play every week. But if you don't have the quarterback depth behind Brady, I think that hurts him. I mean, you don't want to be starting Kirk Cousins. I think I mentioned it with Derek Carr earlier. Kirk Cousins is more that guy that, okay, he's got a good matchup. He's playing a bad defense. I'll throw him out there. Or I've got a bye week and my main guy's down. I'll throw Cousins out there. But if you're starting Kirk Cousins week in and week out, you're going to be in trouble. Now, you know how AJ rolls, and he likes that double whammy setup. So with Jefferson, you know, coming off his big game, I think now he's planning on kind of matching up and marrying those 2 guys. But, I mean, we saw the first 2 weeks of the season, and they looked awful. So I'm not ready to buy into that Viking duo just yet. His running backs, I just don't like. I think both of those, you know, Leonard Fournette and Todd Gurley would be guys that, you know, I'd be moving away from. He kind of reached on both, and you know, that they're aging veteran, you know, old lower backs that isn't really the prototypical AJ move. You know, he likes to kind of go young. He likes to go sexy and the splashes of the kids coming out of college. He's a big college football fan, so he knows all those guys. So I was really surprised. Now AJ will tell you, he'll be the first one to tell you he's not a running back expert. He's been wrong on a lot of running backs over his years, where he tends to hit on a lot more receivers. So I know what he was doing, but I think he just chased big names as opposed to upside. That's going to catch up with him. That Chris Carson injury basically is going to decide AJ's season, whether or not he stays relevant or not. I mean, arguably right now, I mean, you make the case Carson's his 3rd best player. So it looked ugly. It sounds like it's not that bad. They've got an early bye week, so I wouldn't be surprised if Carson sat for a few weeks. And if that happens, I think AJ's lineup just looks poor. I mean, I think, I think AJ's score last week was the lowest score of the season. I mean, is that right?
I know it was the lowest of the week.
Yeah, it may have been the lowest we've seen all season.
But it's close, I mean, that's not.
That kind of just shows you, though, kind of what his floor might be.
Yeah, I mean, with the Hawks playing the Dolphins and the Vikings, and then a bye week, would not be shocked even if he's a healthy scratch that we won't see him.
That's kind of what I'm thinking. I mean, he's definitely not going to get 20 carries a game. That's for sure. And then the way Russell Wilson's playing, Carson's is an afterthought in that offense. He caught a couple early touchdowns and that saved him, but we don't have a rushing touchdown on the year, which is unlike the Seahawks, but they're letting Russ cook. So it's how AJ is, and I think we all do. Like there's a move still to be made by him. He likes to shake things up. So it's whether or not I think a big move's coming, and it's whether or not he hits on that versus misses. I will say the thing that's shocking me, one of the shocks in the NFL right now is the way the Lions are using DeAndre Swift. He's
I'm shocked by that too.
I feel like that. If you look at AJ's roster just on the surface, he's the name that pops. You feel like, okay, Swift is a guy that, he should be playing week in and week out and has, in theory, the most upside. But you're only getting 5 or 6 touches a game. You just can't play him. So he's just basically riding AJ's bench right now, and veterans. But I think AJ's team, he doesn't have those guys consistently that are going to be able to go off and score him points, and he's going to be trying to get to 200 week in and week out.
All right, well, let's go to number 8. That's where I've got AJ. You've got Yusuf at number 8. We've talked about Yusuf's team a little bit earlier, but he's right now we're looking at, I'm pulling it up here, he's 2-1 by the grace of God, but he is second to last in points. His all-play record 8-25, 2 would have lost. He's hanging on the edge here, but 2-1 is 2-1, which puts you in a good position. He's got those running backs. Yusuf's team always kind of seems to be a second half team anyway. I think it feels like that the last few years where he's.
Yeah, I want to say of those 0-3 teams in the last 2 years, it was either last year or the year before. He was one of those teams that started 0-3 and got hot and got into the playoffs. In 2018. So he definitely can do it. Give him credit. He's coming off a win against IAC and RDR. Those are 2 of the powerhouses in the league. But like you said, on down weeks, he's barely scoring 220 and getting wins there. So he's a fake 2-1 right now. Zeke and Henry are his big studs, and Kelsey. But then I don't see anything else. Odell really hasn't hit yet, and that Brown offense looks like they're going to really limit the amount of throws that Baker makes.
Yep.
And quarter now just looks like an absolute mess. He's going in with, Tannehill and Nick Mullins. And, like I said earlier, I don't think Taylor gets that job back. If Herbert keeps playing well, you're not going to pull your first round pick after 3 or 4 starts just because, the incumbent had an injury. I think right now what you're hearing, Lynn, basically, this was on the medical staff that basically cost Dyrod that game 2 start. But now that you've made that move to Herbert, there's just no turning back. So feel bad for Taylor because I wanted to see him have an opportunity there for a year and see what he could do. But I don't think he's getting that job back.
So Herbert's looked too good.
It comes back down to Drew Lock. So maybe Drew back, but now you've taken Sutton away, which is their number 1 weapon. So I don't even know how good of a play Drew Lock is anymore. He had some intrigue as a young guy with some weapons coming in a month ago, but you take away their top receiver, and all of a sudden I don't like Drew Lock as much as I did back in August.
No, when you see him before at the draft time, you've got Sutton, you got the young kid Judy, you got Fant, you got multiple backs. Like, hey, these guys should be able to put up 20 to 30 a week. They can barely move the ball. They may not get 20 to 30 points all year.
Yeah, I agree. Denver all of a sudden looks like a bottom 5 team, and at that point, depending on where they're at, do they rush Drew Lock back, and are here and looking at an upgrade? Drew Lock wasn't a first round pick. They don't have a ton of draft capital in Drew Lock, so I think if Elway, who has always been looking for that quarterback since he took over in Denver, if he starts scouting the college ranks and thinks there is a quarterback that can lead them into the playoffs and further, I think he's fine kind of riding out this year and seeing if he can replace Drew Lock next year. I've gone back and looked at Drew Lock last year going into this draft, and he really had one good game. I want to say the Vikings, maybe the Texans. But yeah,
he really didn't put up numbers though. You're right.
Yeah, 5 or 6 starts, and he looked bad other than one game. And I think people looked at that game and said, okay, the weapons that are here, the Judy pick, that might build into something. But I'd be concerned right now if Drew Lock was, penciled in as my quarterback too.
Yeah, it's not looking good there at all. And Thursday night, we've got the Trevor Lawrence Bowl as it sits right now. We've got the Jets and the Broncos, and we'll see who tries to
Exactly.
lose that one first. All right, at number 7, look at this. I've got you. You've got me. It was meant to be. Tell me about. We don't talk about the Rockford team here. Here's your chance to talk about my middling 1 and 2, a little bit frisky at receiver, not very sexy at quarterback. Running back's a little bit interesting. Tell me about the Rockford team.
I think it's getting a bad rap. Right off the bat, the Pinella division has kind of been, considered the NFC where, if you get to 500, you can win the division. But this year, Los and Randy look like they've got a pretty good squad. So you look at your 2 losses, we're going to see where those 2 teams fall, but they're in the top half of the league right now. So those are actually quality losses that you've been in. We talked about Barkley's injury and having an effect on Kenny's team. I mean, essentially the Michael Thomas injury, that's what you're going through.
Yep.
Forget how bad your keepers were coming in. I mean, you had absolutely nothing really to work with. I mean, even a guy like Michael, who is a surefire number 1, I mean, you could have made the case that without another kind of top level to marry with him to become a 2, you could have let Michael Thomas go if you had other options, because the receiver that you could have replaced him with would have been, not equivalent, but pretty damn close.
Right.
So, you lose Thomas, and that hurts. The thing right now that I think has got you bumped up is the Robinson pickup. I mean, right now, no question, that's the free agent waiver move of the year since the draft. I mean, that guy is putting up, RB1 numbers. And it was funny when they moved Fournette, everybody was chasing downtime in between the draft and the first waivers of, who's that guy going to be? And even if you figured out who that guy was going to be, is it even going to be a guy that you want to start? And so I think a lot of people stayed away. You were right there in the middle of that first round waivers. I think it's 6 or 7, and Robinson fell all the way to you.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think all 12 teams in the league right now would be clamoring to have Robinson.
I wavered all the backs. He was the number 1 guy, though, I went for.
Yeah, and so that was huge. And I mean, I'd watched some film on him. He looked good, but as an undrafted guy from a small school, I didn't know what he'd do. So, it's been 3 games.
Marone loves him.
They haven't really played anybody, but if you look at what he's doing, it's unreal. It's like top 4 all time for yards from a guy whose first 3 games. So that's saving you. You got lucky with the Mac injury, because all of a sudden it propelled Jonathan Taylor from an RB2 to an RB1. So I didn't like your running backs coming off, but you get Taylor and you get Robinson. Now you got 2 really good backs. Your receivers, if Thomas comes back, Lockett now is on fire. And if Russell Wilson's going to keep playing like he is, I mean, the Lockett pick looks great. He's a top 5 receiver just after, the last 2 really big games. So you're not upset about that pick at all, where I know you'd kind of said you were between Ridley and him for a while, but you can't hate that pick at all anymore.
Not after last week.
Yeah, exactly. And then, Cooper Kupp and some of those other guys you picked up now, the young guys, you're the opposite of AJ, where you've got the Higgs, the Pittmans, but you don't have to start them. You can sit there and kind of ride them until they get hot, which is usually what happens with these young receivers, is they get hot, come late October, November. But your starting lineup's pretty good, other than, Bridgewater. I think you don't have that true legit quarterback 1. Stafford could be a low-end quarterback 1. He hasn't had all season, really, so I think that has hurt. Going back to the Swift versus Adrian Peterson thing, I think if Swift was out there full time, I think that would help. But right now, I think if you look at your team, heads up, the weak link right now feels like it's Teddy Bridgewater. And so, but, it's that offense you feel like at some point is going to click. Now, without McCaffrey, that we don't know. But yeah, I think Rockford, even at 1 and 2, has a huge week 4 matchup, because his 2 losses aren't horrible, and he's got the pieces on there. And yeah, I mean, David Montgomery is another guy that I didn't even talk about with the Cohen injury. That's the other guy that all of a sudden just probably spiked 10 spots in the ranks. So you got some breaks at running back, which I didn't like coming out of the draft. Montgomery, we didn't even know if he'd be playing week 1. And all of a sudden now he's a 3-down back in Chicago who just moves to Nick Foles, and they're playing well. So without looking at all the backs, definitely have a trio of backs that can kind of compete with anybody.
Yeah, so far so good. Montgomery's been putting out 20 a game for me, so who would have taken that before the year? All right, now we're gonna go to the playoff teams, and we've all got the same 6 in here. We've got them in a little bit different orders. You may have switched this. Did I switch this appropriately? I don't know if I forgot to or not. I think you wanted to.
Yeah, this is correct.
This is correct. Okay. You've got Los's team at 6, Fisker. I've got Wade's team, the RFBs, as I'm going to call them from here on out. We had Los on yesterday. He did a great job. His team has been good. I have a little bit higher than you, but is this the year Los can get into that Final Four championship game?
Yeah, he had a great draft. That's the thing. I full disclosure, going into that draft, I kind of knew I was taking Edwards-Helaire first pick, but I really kind of wanted Murray, and I knew he'd be there early. There were a lot of teams that had 2 quarterbacks, so I thought if he fell past a certain spot, he might fall, but I didn't really want to. And so, I was talking to Los, I was talking to Jeffrey, I was talking to AJ about kind of what it would take to get up there, and I wanted to wait and see if the guy was going to be available. But Los was the one who kind of just told me, listen, Casey, I've got a game plan. I know what I want to do this year. And so I was curious. I was interested to see how that would shake out because, this is year 4, I believe, for Los. And, he came out hot in year 1 and then hasn't really lived up to it. So I think he has now figured out what you've got to do. But you look at his picks. Hopkins right out the gate made sense, but I know a lot of people were kind of away from him, changing teams, no training camp and preseason. A lot of people stay away from receivers, getting a new quarterback. But Hopkins has been, an absolute stud. And then going Keenan Allen. You look at the receivers that were taken after him. Keenan Allen was by far the best one. And then Aaron Rodgers, he started a run there in the 3rd round by taking Rodgers. But you look at the guys that went after him, way better than all those guys. And then at pick 4, he took Diggs. And if you look at all those receivers in round 5, Diggs is way better than all those guys. So he nailed his first 4 picks. And I think Los was in a similar boat as you, as his team didn't look great coming out of keepers. He didn't have a ton of talent, but he had all these early picks. So it was really going to be determined based on how his draft played out. And I thought it was great. I mentioned Robinson as a heck of a pickup, but Mike Davis, I was hesitant on Mike Davis kind of taking over for McCaffrey. Mm-hmm. 1 game in, he looks great. And I don't know how long that's going to last, but it fills a hole on Los's team for at least the next month. It's the reason, full disclosure, without giving away, I told you a last-second swap. I moved up a spot here, and I moved him down mostly because of his running backs. I really like his 3 receivers. Mike Davis isn't here forever. So at some point, he's got to figure out a replacement for Mike Davis. And then Kareem Hunt is putting up numbers, but I don't know how long that'll last. He's always going to be playable, but I don't think he's going to be, putting up the RB1 stats he has been. Yeah. And then after that, he's good. He can ride the Garoppolo. He can ride the Phillip Rivers and the Garoppolo thing and play matchup there. But I don't love his depth, but I like his starting lineup a lot. So we'll see what happens when we get into bye weeks and he has to start going to that depth. But no, it's like I said, he's the better drafts out there. And for what he was working with coming in, he did a pretty good job. He's going to be in there and he's going to be battling for that vanilla division definitely all the way till the end.
Yeah, definitely. He's right there at the top. Next, you got Wade's team, the RFBs. I just inverted with Los there. Wade's team, usually you get some bad luck from Wade early. Nothing yet so far.
Honestly, like the thing about Wade, he's actually had quiet bad luck. Okay, so he comes out of the keepers with Galladay, Godwin, and Shark. We're in week 4. He hasn't had all 3 of those guys healthy yet. Godwin just pulled a hammy, so you're probably looking at another 2 weeks with him. I think he's going to go half the season without all 3 of those receivers healthy. And so he had the depth that he can survive that. And
really good depth. Jacobs, Josh Allen.
Joe Mixon, I've been disappointed with. I thought in that offense he'd be getting a little bit more action. They've still just never really incorporated him into the passing game. Josh Allen, I mean, has been a borderline MVP. You
There's a
know,
159 in 3 games. Good God.
yeah, 3-0, and they're putting up numbers. So I mean, him and Russell Wilson right now are by far the two best players in the league. Um, Daniel Jones is his hole right now, and he doesn't have a backup there. But I mean, if you looked at Daniel Jones' schedule, you knew he was going to come off to a bad start. I mean, he played Steelers, I mean, 3 or 4 really tough games right out the gate, and then it opens up where he plays the NFL, where you can pass on him. So I think we haven't seen the best of Wade yet.
Jones was good against crap last year, so yeah, it's a good take.
Exactly. So I mean, if Jones gets hot, I really like Wade's team, but we haven't seen it yet.
And let's hope we don't see it week 4.
And I also think that's true. And I think the Bar injury also hurts Daniel Jones quite a bit as well. So
Green game and all that fun stuff.
Yeah. So Josh Jacobs has looked good. He just needs to get his receivers healthy. But we haven't even mentioned Robert Woods is always steady. Tyler Boyd has looked great in the last 2 weeks too, as Burrow starts to get hot.
I think Burrow's going to make a lot of receivers look good.
Exactly. So with those injuries right off the bat, he's had the depth at receiver. The thing about him is you had Godwin, Galladay, Chark, all as double-digit round keepers. So when you're getting 3 of those guys in the 10 and later rounds, you're going to have depth. Mm-hmm. So he's got that. He's going to be tough out come bye weeks, because he's always going to have guys that look like are his normal starters.
Agreed. At number 4, I've got RDR. He's actually moved up after a loss. I've kind of rethought that a little bit. And you've got Cappers. Now, Cappers has gotten a lot of play. I think everybody who's been on the podcast has been a fan of Cappers' team. A lot of talent, a lot of high-end talent, not a lot of depth. What does Casey Tager think of Randy and the good old Cappers?
Yeah, well, I got Cappers this week in a must-win, so I don't like seeing them this high in a game that I feel like I've got to go out and but we talked about it, and you've talked about it before. It's always about the studs, and that's what he's got. I mean, he's got 4 superstars, studs that can score 40. He has 2 quarterbacks, Kamara and Tyreek Hill. I don't think he has that middle-level talent that I think a lot of others think he has. I think he has a drop-off quite a bit after those 4. The move
to be rough for Randy.
The move that basically really hurts him right now is he dropped Darrell Henderson the week before Cam Akers gets hurt. So if he was still riding Darrell Henderson, his team is terrifying right now, because you got the 2. I mean, right now his 2 is Latavius Murray, Boston Scott, Chris Thompson until Akers gets back. So he's got a huge hole at RB2. And then, his receivers, Robbie Anderson's been good. CeeDee Lamb has been good. I don't know none of those guys really feel like a legit receiver 2, that they feel more like receiver 3s. Really have a tight end. But, the Cam Newton pick looks like one of the picks of the draft as well. I mean, I think a lot of people were hesitant. I was. Me. He was a reason of my demise for the last 4 years. So, and I know a lot of people are just, stay away from Cam because of everything else. But the Belichick marriage with him always kind of made sense. And I mean, he looks great right now. We'll see if that sticks. But even without that, I mean, Cappers has always been known as Watson and Wentz. So even when he took Cam Newton, I think it was just take him and see what happens. I don't even think he was planning on playing Cam Newton when he made that pick. But because Wentz has looked so bad and Cam Newton's looked so good, it's kind of shored that up. Because if he was riding, Wentz every week, I think he'd have a bigger issue. So, yeah, we'll see. I mean, he's got the 4 studs, and when those 4 studs hit and get him 109, he's going to be tough. But without those other guys that I feel like can prop him up, if 1 or 2 of those guys are a little bit off, he can be beat.
Yeah, you could use a waiver wire pickup, maybe a trade. I think I'm repeating myself from an earlier pod, but at any given week, you can throw up a 320, and that's scary stuff. At 3, we've inverted these again. You've got the RDR revival. I've got Cappers there. We had Ian on Friday, did a great job breaking down the Mahomes trade. He's obviously had some bad luck with CDC going down, or CMC, excuse me. And he's not very deep, but he's got those quarterbacks.
Yeah, I mean, in all honesty, like I said a little bit earlier, like I'm not looking at the 1-2 record at all. I mean, I'm just in my rankings. It's like, okay, who am I afraid to play if I'm matching up my team against them? And I can make the case Ian belongs at number one right now. It's it's behind Mahomes and Lamar. I mean, those two guys, pencil in 100 between them, no question. And the 120, 130 can happen when both those guys hit. We've seen it before. So those two quarterbacks together are always going to be intimidating. The McCaffrey thing, he's going to come back and he's going to be fine. Those ankle injuries, you give it enough time, you're back to 100%. It's not really something that lingers all year. And then, I don't hate his depth. His receivers are Julio Jones, Allen Robinson with Nick Foles there actually just, spikes back up.
Better with Foles.
A lot better. And then DJ Moore, who's been disappointing now, but you feel like is going to get picked back up once that offense kind of starts clicking.
I'm on the Julio is toast train.
I went in a little bit thinking that was going to happen. I wouldn't call him toast. The injury right off the bat scares me. If he was to miss 2 games, I would think maybe this thing would linger. But we will see. I mean, the Falcons kind of have to get a win this week. So I would think that they're going to try and get Jones out there.
By toast, I don't think he's wide receiver 1 anymore. He's a wide receiver 2 at this point.
Yeah, I'd put him still low end 1. I mean, he put up a 40 in week 1. I was playing him in week 1, so he still shows what he can do. Ridley's only going to help open things up.
40 against that Seahawks secondary is a 15.
That's true. And we haven't seen him since, other than the game he got hurt in. So I know Ian's really high on Deontay Johnson, so we'll see if he can still ride that wave, because I mean that gives him 4 receivers deep. The one thing that we say about Ian, when he gets McCaffrey back, he's like with Randy, he's missing that RB2, but what he's done now, he's got all the lotto tickets. I mean, he's got Zeke's, he's got Drake's backup, he's got Gurley's backup, he's got Singletary's backup. So he's sitting back, and I mean, if one of those guys get injured,
probably will happen.
He's unbeatable. Now, the other thing about Ian that a lot of people aren't really looking at is like, look at his schedule. I mean, the next 2 games he goes Blake and Kinney, who we very bottom of this thing. Mm-hmm. So instantly he's getting back 2 wins right off the bat. And I'm trying to find losses from Ian. So you look at some of the top teams. He plays Wade late in the year when Wade is missing both his quarterbacks. So that's a win. Week 13, he's got McCaffrey and Moore on bye going back into the Carl, so those will be for him. Then you look at the 2 games where either Mahomes or Lamar's on bye, and I think one week he plays AJ, which is a win. The other week I think he plays Musa, but I don't see Ian losing more than 3 more games, and so that puts him at 9-5, and that gets you into the playoffs.
Yeah, let me pull I wanted to curious on something. Pulling up a schedule here. But the only thing is, the last 2 weeks he's put up an average of 221. The only concern there, and anybody can put up 221.
Yeah, and that's without McCaffrey and Julio essentially in both those games.
True. Good point.
So I mean, both of those you could easily prop back up to 240, 250, which scary score once those guys get healthy. I mean, that's where the schedule break comes into play. I mean, if he was playing anybody other than Blake and Kinney the next 2 weeks, I think he's got some losses. I would love to see Blake or Kinney throw up a 225, 230, see if they can get Ian, a scare. But, you look at those 2 teams, other than Blake's week 1, they've been struggling at 100. So, even Ian at his lowest is scoring 220, which I think is enough to beat his next 2 opponents, which then I believe gives McCaffrey enough time to get healthy.
All right, well, let's look at number 2. Casey's got, I think we inverted these as well. I've got Musa, you've got Jeff, so we know who number 1 is. So we'll just throw them both up there. And maybe if we can break down, Jeff's 3-0. He's tops in points, tops in all play. If you compare rosters, maybe you like Musa's a little bit more than Jeff's. Very even, though, so far. 2 really good teams. Anytime you sweep the Carl to start the season, that's a good start. two teams that do believe in Pennywise, and two teams that I think one of these could get Pennywise at some point this year. So Casey, always prepared. Talk to me about these two teams, how they kind of compare, contrast. Will one of these get a title this year potentially?
Yeah, they're 1A and 1B. I think when Jeffrey's team peaks, he's got the better squad. But I think the floor play is kind of with Musa. Musa's three receivers are probably as good as any three receivers in the league. Mike Evans hasn't really done much, but we know what Mike Evans can do. Is always going to put up his numbers, and Adam Thielen is still scoring kind of at will when the Vikings are rolling. The Chubb, David Johnson, Miles Sanders is three backs deep. Even Miles Gaskin's a kind of an undercover pickup that he made earlier. That's when he gets into a pinch and needs to play a guy on bye, Gaskin looks like he can throw up a 15 or 20. Jeffrey mentioned it earlier about Moose's team. It's the Brady pickup trade that he did with AJ really saved his team. You looked at his roster and he said, okay, there's the weak spot. It's if Fitzpatrick ever gets benched for Tua, he's got to start Darnold, and Darnold has looked JV. So him being able to ride Brady instead of ever having to consider going, basically just saved him. And I think that's the move that has Moose at 1 for me. Is Brady's not the Brady of old, but he's way better than Darnold. And
31 points a game so far. We'll take it.
Yeah, exactly. And he hasn't even really peaked. I still don't think we've even seen the Brady. Now Godwin injury is going to hurt, but that's going to be a couple week thing, and then he'll be back. But I really like Moose's team. He's got a big game with Los this week that we'll probably talk about on Friday's show. But looking at Jeffrey's team, I think everything's kind of gone right. I mean, Ridley's the number one receiver. Does he have the number one receiver? I really like Ridley a lot, but I think he's playing out of his mind right now. And then, receivers behind that, Juju's just been okay. Deontay's taken a lot of that. And then, Marquise Brown, Hollywood, after yesterday's game or 2 days ago,
not been good.
You have reservations on him all of a sudden. And how many yards Lamar's actually going to pass. So, Jeffrey's receivers, I think that's the difference between him and Moose's team. He's got that one stud right now, but he doesn't really feel great about his 2 and 3. Juju needs to step up for Jeffrey to one spot.
That 2018 Goff back.
Yeah, exactly. Goff is going to be tough in that offense with no fans. McVay will have that offense, and he can hear everything. So that he's got the reads that he can hear. But the Matt Ryan trade is really the thing that saved him. And you look. Well, it's funny. A lot of people have said that saved him, and I know we've talked about it derailing Blake's team. But if you look back at the draft, he traded a 4 for Matt Ryan. The next 2 quarterbacks that were drafted were Cam Newton and Ben Roethlisberger. So would Jeffrey have really been in that big of a pinch if he doesn't make that trade? He probably takes one of those 2 guys. Now, neither of them really have the upside of Matt Ryan, but they're both playing well. Cam Newton, I think you'd rather have. So I don't know if that's the move that saved him, but the reason it works is because he has Calvin Ridley. So the Matt Ryan, Calvin Ridley connection, it's been the hottest thing in the league right now. And I think that is Jeffrey. If that sticks and, Ridley ends the year as a top 5 receiver, I think Jeffrey's probably the 1 seed going in. But that I still want to see that happen. I still want to see Julio come back. I still want to see Atlanta playing some tougher defenses. But they play in a dome. Matt Ryan has shown that he can move the ball. But I also about that team in general with the coaching staff. When do they move away from Quinn? Does that help Matt Ryan? Does it hurt Matt Ryan? I don't know. So we'll see. I will say the Dalvin Cook explosion that we saw last week was big. He basically gave up Kyler Murray to go get Dalvin Cook, kind of just to shore up that running back spot. that he wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. And then, Dalvin's pretty slowly, but yeah, I mean, he exploded and he showed you what he can do. I mean, we saw it last year. He was number 2, number 3 back while he was healthy. So if Jeffrey gets that Dalvin Cook and sticks with Ridley, he's going to be damn tough to beat. But I still like Moose's team kind of top to bottom when they're at full strength without any bye weeks. But yeah, I mean, I think it was George Kittle too is the X factor. We haven't even really seen him this year, and we know what he can be. So that's that other stud that Jeffrey hasn't even really had to deploy yet, and he's sitting at 3-0, which is the other thing that he has in his back pocket that makes him scary.
He does have George Kittle playing, though. He's just playing defense for the Colts. The Colts have put up back-to-back 51s, and look at their schedule coming up here, Casey. At Bears, not a scary offense. A little bit better now, though. At Browns versus Bengals, at Lions, and then they got the Ravens, Titans, Packers. So it picks up there in the second half. But, playoffs, he's got Raiders, Texans, Steelers. Those are pretty good offenses, I guess. But that's the
Don't
one.
remind me, because I mean, I had the Colts week 1 and played them, and I dropped them. They got me an 18 in week off Jags, and that just was red flag number 1. Like, I thought the Jags, I mean, were going to go winless this year. If you wanted me to be honest, back 3 weeks ago. So I mean, this totally turned me off on the Colts. And back then, I thought the Texans offense with Deshaun Watson was going to be a little bit scarier. And knowing they were in division, I was their schedule, and it looked more intimidating 3 weeks ago than it did now. It's funny. I mean, full disclosure was that, you knew they had the Jets in week 3, which was playable, but it was the Vikings in week 2 that always kind of scared me off of them.
Yeah.
Now, the Rivers is going to try and kind of just manage the game and slow ball it, which plays to their defense. And I always liked, they've got Leonard, they acquired Buckner this year. So I liked their defense. At some point, I think that Colt offense is a little fugazi. They've lost Pittman now, and they lost Paris Campbell, which are 2 of their top 3 receivers. I don't know if they're going to be able to play kind of ball control like they have the first 3 weeks, the rest of the year. They're playing really bad teams. I mean, the Vikings and the Jets are horrible. And so it's not really about the offenses that they're going against. I think when they start playing better defenses and the Colts are going more 3 and out, I think that I've seen something where the Colts have the least amount of 3 and outs on the year. But a lot of that's because of the defense. You start playing the Bears and you start playing the Ravens, you start playing the Texans, and you're punting the ball and the other team's getting it in better field position, I think that'll start to even things out. But I mean, you know SKFL defensive scoring as well as I do. I mean, that's the game changer. I mean, you look at the past couple of years, Patriots and the Bears. I mean, when you can write a defense like that, it's when I do my weeks and I do my rankings here, I really don't look at defenses. It's so hard to predict, and it can be so absurd that it's a 50-point swing, and you hit on a 50-point defense and you go up against a team that throws up an 8 or a 9.
Huge.
It really doesn't matter what the rest of the team does. I mean, that's basically a win. So that's the thing about Jeffrey's team right now is, take away those 2 50-point defenses, and he's not sitting at 3-0. And I think that's the reason I've got Musa a little bit ahead of him. It's you don't want your team to be based on a defense scoring 40 a week, which Jeffrey's isn't, but it has carried him right now.
Excellent points. I thought it was a very well thought out top 11, Casey. Really enjoyed talking with you about it. Well, hopefully we'll do a bunch more of these over the course of the next 13, 14 weeks, maybe through the playoffs, off-season stuff. We'll just do all kinds of fun stuff here. So appreciate you joining me. We'll look forward to doing it again. Have a great rest of your night, buddy.
Rob, thanks a bunch. I will keep in touch. I'll be back soon. And everybody remember, go out and vote, and go Heat.
Go Heat, indeed. All right, man. Have a good night.
All right, man.